Today we're looking at price discrimination, a higher level only topic, still part of theory of the firm. And price discrimination we see in various places in the economy, which we'll look at in a moment. But price discrimination exists when a producer sells, so we've got the exact same product. We've got to different consumers, so that's key, at different prices. And then it's really important to realize where the price difference is not justified by differences in cost. So they're not charging different prices because it costs differently. They're charging different price differences where it is not justified by differences in cost. So what are some examples of price discrimination? Well, I'm sure you've seen it at Canada's Wonderland, where students or youth have a different price than adults and children have a different price. You've seen it in cinemas. You see it on the TTC. Sometimes, okay, you're hopefully not going into bars for happy hour, but sometimes there's like ladies' night, where women have lower price drinks or admissions to different different venues. Certainly for the airlines, when we're looking at business versus vacation travel. So here's TTC fare from 2013, and you can see certainly the different prices. An adult is charged $3, whereas a student or senior is $2, and so on. So according to ages, also we've got a Downtown Express sticker. Sorry, I'm not sure how that's price discrimination, but it might be in terms of the delivery of how fast it can go. I'm not sure. So here we talked about the cinema, but also women's products. Some studies have said that women's products, whether they're the disposable razors or in this case deodorant, are 7% higher, more expensive than the men's products. And I've heard it being much higher, even more, around 38% more expensive. And you see it in haircuts and different things as well. How are customers different that are charged different prices? Well, they might be different because of age. We talked about that with the TTC. Might be according to sex, women versus men. Could be geographical distances. There could be time differences. And I'll put etc. So 3 conditions have to exist for price discrimination. It's important that you remember all 3. So first of all, the producer must have some kind of price setting ability, because if it was perfect competition, we know that all the firms are charging the market price. They don't charge more because people will go elsewhere. They don't charge less because they can sell as much as they want at the market price. So oligopolies and monopolies are the most common market structure for this. Secondly, the consumers have to have different price elasticities of demand. And we touched on this a little bit when we looked at how different firms, when we were looking initially at price elasticity of demand, we looked at cinemas and we looked at airline travel, and we saw that the companies could maximize revenue by charging different prices depending on the elasticity of demand. So in the case of airline travel, business travelers were inelastic and they got charged a higher price and total revenue went up. Vacationers' elasticity of demand was more elastic and prices tended to be lower, again raising total revenue. And thirdly, the producer must be able to separate the consumers, so they cannot buy it at one price and then sell it to each other, and so there then the consumers would be making the additional revenue. So that has to be prevented. So let's look by the airline companies. Number 1, the price setting ability. They tend to be oligopolies. So this is true. Secondly, different PEDs. So we've got the business person who has to get to that New York meeting no matter what. So business tends to be inelastic, or their demand tends to be inelastic. Vacationers tend to have, an elastic demand. And so with the inelastic party, if we put the price up, we know that total revenue will go up. And with vacationers, if we can try and keep the price down, total revenue goes down. And 3, prevent consumers from selling to each other. So you have to provide ID is a big one. So you can't have someone going out there and scooping up the cheap prices and then turning around and sort of like at a baseball game or something, scalping the tickets at the airport, because the name has to match. Your name has to match what's on the ticket. You have to be able to prove that. So markets, we looked at how they can be separated. We looked at time, we looked at age, gender, sometimes income. Income can come into play, for instance, sometimes with lawyers' fees and higher income people being charged more than a lower income person, and I'm sure there's other examples. Geographical distance. Someone did an extended essay looking at the price of gasoline as an example, and there was quite a distinctive difference between the price of gas in cities versus in more rural areas, but also differences of whether you're on the West Coast, East Coast, and so on, and types of consumers. Advantages for firms of price discrimination. They can have a higher level of revenue. They may enable the producer to produce more of the product and gain economies of scale. They may enable a firm to drive competitors out of the more elastic party and gain extra revenue from the inelastic sales. So from year to year, you will see sometimes airlines engaging in quite a price war, trying to drive competitors out of the vacation market. Advantages for the consumer. The poorer consumers may be subsidized by the wealthier ones. So again, I think of airline traveling, and if you're lucky to get one of those cheap tickets, you sort of suspect you might be being subsidized by those who are paying a higher price. It usually increases the total output, so the product is available to more customers, and it may lead to economies of scale, lower unit costs, and lower prices for some consumers. Disadvantages to the consumer. Any consumer surplus that existed before the price discrimination will be lost. So just looking at the graph here, remember that the consumer surplus was we have people who are willing and able to pay that higher price in the equilibrium, also a higher price in the equilibrium, a higher price in the equilibrium, and then they would gain all of this because the price they would pay would be the equilibrium price. Well, with price discrimination, what the producer is going to do is if someone's willing and able to pay these higher prices, they're going to try and make it so they do have to pay the higher price. And so the consumer surplus is lost. And some consumers will pay more than the price that would have been charged in a single non-discriminated market. First degree price discrimination. This takes place when each consumer pays exactly the price that he or she is prepared to pay. So if you think of trading in a bazaar, particularly if you've been to India or other countries, and what happens in the bazaar or marketplace is very active, bargaining takes place to determine the price, and so people are haggling back and forth. Second degree is when takes place when a firm charges different prices to consumers depending on how much they purchase. So I think of sort of Costco, where things are in bulk, but at any rate, bulk buying. But this can also happen as a firm. When we were in business, if we were going to buy a small quantity of textiles, the price would be relatively high. But as soon as we went to tens of thousands of meters, the price per meter came down quite a bit. Third degree price discrimination. This has an asterisk because this is the one that we are focusing on. This takes place when consumers are identified in different market segments, and a separate price is charged in each market segment that recognizes the different price elasticities of demand in each segment. And this is the most common form of price discrimination. And we looked at some of these already. So we have the TTC, we've got amusement parks, there's airline travel, etc. All right, these graphs are going to look a little scary, but let's look at them very slowly. So let's say that we are looking at airlines, to put it into perspective. And market one, being PED, is inelastic. We're looking at business. And we're looking at the fact that the price is higher. So we're going to start the price up here. The demand curve, or average revenue, same thing, will be relatively steep, and marginal revenue, of course, is to the left of average revenue and goes through the x-axis. So this represents business. Market 2, we'll say PED is elastic. We'll say it's vacationers because they have a lot of choice of how they're going to travel and when, and the price tends to be lower. So you'll see that the price starts off lower. The demand curve, or average revenue, is relatively flat compared to the first market segment. And again, MR is to the left of AR. Now, the last graph is simply a combination of these two. So we're going to take this price and start it here. And we'll take this quantity and put it there, etc. The kink starts when we start at the price where market 2 began, which was the vacationers. Now we've got a combination of the two graphs being added together. So this is why there's a kink, and it comes out and starts to flatten out because it's a combination of the inelastic market 1 and the elastic market 2. So hopefully you're all right with marginal revenue being the marginal revenue of the first market to the marginal revenue of the second. So this is for now the firm. We would have some marginal cost structure, and we would know that marginal cost, we're going to, operate where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. So here, at this quantity. So we'll bring this along as if this is our marginal cost price point or cost point. All right, so when we now go to look at the individual markets, and we know where marginal cost is, again, we're going to produce where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. There's our quantity of how many business seats we're going to offer. We're going to bring it up to the demand curve, or the average revenue curve, to determine the price. So we've now managed to figure out what our market 1 should look like in terms of quantity and price. Again, taking marginal cost across to our second market, we're going to maximize profit where marginal cost equals marginal revenue, which is here. This becomes our quantity of how many seats we're going to offer for the vacationers. At that quantity, we're going to go up to the demand curve, or the average revenue curve. Bring that across. And sorry, this P and this becomes, sorry, the P2 is a little this should be down here. It's not quite aligned perfectly. Okay. All right, so now we know what the price is going to be, which is here. This was our initial price here. This is what we're not interested in once we know what the price is that we're going to charge. Okay, so so that is how you do the combined third degree price discrimination graphs. Do make sure you can draw it. So let's do one of for ourselves. Again, we're going to look at airlines. We're going to focus on market 1, which is business. We have PED, that's inelastic. We're going to start off with the price being higher. So let's do a steep AR curve. Let's do MR through the x-axis. This is quantity and price. Okay, now let's do market 2, which are vacationers. PED tends to be elastic, and we're going to start the average revenue curve where price is lower. So we'll start the price here. It's going to be flatter. Here's our AR. Here's the MR. Okay, so far so good. Quantity and price. Okay, so now let's do the combined graph. We're going to bring this across. Sorry, I don't have a ruler. This will be where we start the P. Up until this point, it's going to be relatively steep because we're only looking at the inelastic market 1. At this point where we meet this price, we're now combining the two curves, and so it kinks out. So marginal revenue of market 1 plus market 2. We're going to have some marginal cost function for this business. We're going to produce where MC equals MR. This will be our overall quantity of business and vacationer seats. We'll bring this point across our market, 2 markets. This is the equivalent of our where MC equals MR. Looking at the first marketplace, we're going to produce where MC equals MR. That becomes our quantity that we're going to produce. In terms of the price, at that quantity, we go up to the average revenue curve, and this becomes our price for market 1. Again, with the MC, we're going to look at where it intersects MR. This becomes our quantity. We go up to the average revenue, and this becomes the price here for market 2. So we now know overall how many seats we're going to produce, what we're going to focus on for vacationers, what we're going to focus on for business, and we know the price for each market segment. Now we're jumping to a slightly different topic, but very brief. Something called a contestable market. So a market is defined as contestable when barriers to entry are low. Firms entering the market would face similar costs to firms that are already there and would be able to get back their entry costs, less depreciation, when they leave the industry. So in other words, it's fairly easy to enter a contestable market, and it's fairly easy to exit a contestable market, and your market structure is the same as the existing firms. So in other words, you're really quite a threat to those firms that are already there because you can enter easily, exit easily, and automatically compete with the same cost structure. The lower the sunk costs of entry, so that's how much money the setup costs are, the more contestable a market will be. If a market is contestable, the existing firm, if it is a monopoly, or firms, if it is an oligopoly, in the industry are more likely to charge lower prices than the short-run profit maximizing price. Now the reason why is that because they are afraid of other people entering the market, they're already going to do sort of a preemptive strategy and start to charge less to hopefully prevent those people from entering and taking away their customers. So they would not want potential rivals to enter the market to try to compete away their profits. So thus it is, what I really want to emphasize here, it is the potential competition rather than the actual competition in the market which leads to pricing and output decisions. The implication then is that even if the industry is a monopoly or an oligopoly, it's the threat. So this threat is a really driving force. The threat of new firms will make the established firms behave as if they were in a competitive industry with lower prices, greater efficiencies, and lower production costs. Thank you.